And let's see. Okay, so can you spotlight me so I can see where I am? And oh, no. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Right. Okay. I think we're ready. So my glasses are fogged up because I was rushing. Anyway, I think I've gathered it together, and I'm so pleased that you're here. We're on our final class of this short course, kind of around the entire emotional universe and back again in 6 short weeks. Pretty intense. Healing anxiety and depression, all about how to listen to the kernel of wisdom that we have. So what we've covered so far, and I'll get up the screen share just to kind of jolt our memory a little bit, that when we're looking at anxiety and depression, there's no one cause. And this matters because, you know, we're looking for the one cure, but there isn't just one cure, because there are multiple reasons that we have anxiety, depression, stress, boredom, angst. The causes can be many and varied, and so it takes a multi-pronged approach to actually heal depression and anxiety. However, all of those things that cause depression and anxiety are caused themselves by the toxic emotions, and these have really specific and effective antidotes. And when we hold on to our toxic emotions, such as pride or attachment and craving, or anger and hostility, as we know from this picture, you know, it definitely harms us. Whether it harms anybody else, often it does. But all of those toxic emotions, they are toxic within our own heart, and they have really big ramifications. But these emotions are, they're universal, and the Buddha found cures for these, universal cures. So that's something that we can all do straight away, and we can do something about them. And as we looked at a couple of weeks ago, anxiety and depression, the multiple causes can range from organic causes, you know, what's happening in our nervous system, our diet, how much sleep we're getting, whether we've got hormonal changes, whether we're ill, really basic physiological effects on us. It can also be a response to events. It can be because we have habit patterns that dominate us, you know, from when we're really little. And so our default isn't one that's positive, but it's one that's very stressed or tight or anxious. And then these afflictive states of mind, which is what we've been kind of delving into in this course. And what we've looked at are the 3 types of patience. So we looked at that in relation to dealing with frustration and anger and hostility. But these 3 types of patience are actually effective for any problem, anything that we don't like, anything that's difficult. We can fall back on these 3 types of patience, and they will see us through to a solution. So were there any questions or comments that came up from last week that we need to deal with, or maybe we're going to run out of time? But you know, if you do have questions, then please raise your hand or put them into the chat. What we're going to have a look at today are to sum it all up is the depression part of things, because we've looked at the anxiety part, but we'll have a look at the depression. Oh, Venerable, yes, you've raised your hand.
Yes.
Oh, I can't hear.
Unmute. Yeah.
Oh,
thank you very much. My question, as we were going over, for example, the teaching that you did last week about anger and all the patient antidotes, I just wanted to ask, so on a daily basis, what do you do as incorporated in your practice when you're not, you know, in the throes of any of that? How do you incorporate, say, any one of those? Because I think that's the part that we were starting to think, yes, it's great having the homework pages and all that, but to see how to practice, incorporate it, you know, in a way that we'll actually do it. Yeah.
Yep. And I mean, the go-to way to how to incorporate it day to day, it's the 4 immeasurables, the 4 immeasurable attitudes. And, you know, you don't need to be Buddhist or religious. They're universal. So developing great loving kindness, great compassion, great equanimity, great joyousness and empathy. So they're our whole attitude to life. They will flavor everything in the exact perfect way. So starting off the day with those 4 immeasurable attitudes will set us off in the right direction. And so, you know, equanimity and will help with keeping our mind stable through the ups and downs. We'll have it already as a grounding. Loving kindness means that hostility doesn't have a chance to arise. And then when we're already down and depressed and sad, then we can use that to develop our compassion. Instead of shut down, it makes us a better person, a kinder person with empathy. So, I mean, that's what we'll have a look at today. And then just how to keep the fuel in the tank, joyousness, empathic joy, feeling really fortunate and feeling really happy for others when things go well. And even if it's others that we don't like or we're a bit jealous, then remembering from a Buddhist point of view, things are going well, not randomly, but because they put in place the causes. So even if you don't like the person, you can rejoice at their merit, at the fact that they've been able to create enough merit and momentum for this human life. So there's got to be something good in there. So that practice, it's the go-to practice, and it's the one that starts every single meditation sadhana, every single puja. It all, our attitude gets focused around that. We adjust our motivation. There's no better way to incorporate all of this stuff than starting right there. And then the worksheets and everything is a way of starting the conversation, and then the patience and things you'll be able to apply it when you start with that grounding of the 4 immeasurables. So I hope that helps.
Oh, I was even thinking, if I want to be able to remember those antidotes, say to anger, maybe I make a little 3x5 card so that I can pull it out, you know, additional to what you're saying.
Absolutely.
It's the antidotes, like how to remember those, you know.
Yeah, well, you don't remember them by rote learning. You've got to remember them by actually doing them. And when you do them once, you just go, wow, it's unforgettable. So then the other thing of how we forget how we have a community that supports us, and we forget to go to our Dharma wisdom because we're, you know, relatively new. So actually the answer to that one is to just make sure you attend at least one class somewhere every week. It honestly doesn't even matter what class you go to, but just having that Dharma check-in minimum every week means that we remember to apply the Dharma when things go wrong. because we're setting up the environment that supports us and reminds us. Because this is the big thing, isn't it? Things go wrong and we just back right off our Dharma practice. We don't have time to go to the Dharma center. We don't have time for class, and we forget all of everything that we've put into place, and we just fall back on what we're most familiar with, which is pretty much our old bad habit patterns. So how to support ourselves in that, instead of going, oh, I should have this or I should have that, is to put ourselves into an environment that's already there, that already has this worldview, that already supports us. And then it's much more likely that we'll remember to look at things from a Dharma point of view. We'll remember to listen to our inner kernel of wisdom. We'll have the courage to do so. That's why we have Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We need that exposure day to day. Then it becomes very easy. But if you don't have that day-to-day exposure, it's like you're very isolated. It takes a huge amount of energy. Oh, Oren, yes?
I don't want to bring this up if it's the wrong time, but when we were having our study group last night, I got caught up on situations that elicit anger and how I normally react. I mean, I don't yell and holler and carry on. I just obsess.
Yeah.
And then I try to talk to people that will confirm my experience. But and what sets me off is when I feel that I or other people are taken advantage of, or not responded to, or not respected. And something happened to me recently where I was not treated. I was treated badly, and because I just realized today when I was telling my shrink about it, she said, well, why didn't you defend yourself? And I said, because I'm always speaking up to people. I talk to people who don't wear masks and everybody says I wouldn't say anything. People are going to kill you. People throw stuff on the street and I always say something. And they say somebody, and actually I was hit once when that happened. But anyway, but she said, why didn't you defend yourself? And afterwards I thought, I didn't do that. I felt intimidated. And and I don't know.
So Oren, there's we have a whole lot of popular psychology that will help us in the day-to-day, human interaction, best strategies, that kind of thing. But it doesn't get to the root.
Yeah.
And the root of it is, when we are defending ourselves, who are we defending and what are we defending ourselves against? So who we feel hostility to, who we speak up to, what happens every single time is we speak up to that person. But we've got to speak up to their delusions. We have to be the friend of that person. And that's where psychology falls down. It never says that we have to be the friend of our enemy, because our enemy is struggling and our enemy is not happy, and that's why they're acting badly. So we can't defend ourselves against our enemy, but our enemy's delusions. And this is the really difficult thing to grasp in the heat of the moment. And often, like if you have pets or very young children, you'll know it's not them. They're not evil. They're not a monster. It's their delusions. But it's much more difficult for us to remember that with grown-ups. But actually, that really cuts to the quick of it. So the benefit of this is that we can keep our momentum. So when we have this feeling of social injustice, that's a mixed bag, isn't it? Because it comes from this intense concern and care, this innate feeling that we have, this is not right. This is, and that you've got to keep. That's the bodhisattva warrior part of it, this concern for others, We can't squish that one down. And often we squish that one down because we can't bear that feeling without being able to do something about it. And so we go, oh, okay, it's just easier to just be cynical and not care. I'm over it, kind of thing. But we have this momentum of the concern and the care, and then we go and we get the wrong target, and we target the person, and we think it's the person's fault. But it's not, it's the person's delusion's fault. So you've got to get the right target. If you get the right target, everything else will follow. So the right target is, you know, say with feminism, feminism isn't just to ban all men. It's not to get rid of men. It's to target sexism within men, to liberate men. So that's the thing. We've got to be able to liberate ourselves, the vulnerable, and the oppressor.
But what if a person can speak up for other people, but they can't speak up
for themselves? Yeah, that's right.
Because that's the situation I was in.
Yep. And I understand that too. And there's probably many, there's many compounding factors in that one. So you've got to take that one really slowly. And probably the best way to speak up for oneself is to take another voice and think, well, how would my dear friend speak up for me? How would His Holiness the Dalai Lama speak up for me? And take that other voice within you that isn't used to standing up for yourself. Because we're disassociated from it, aren't we? So, Oren, I'm hoping that in today's class, we're actually going to tackle this very thing of what to do, because this is pretty much how depression arises. We have the whoosh of energy, and it goes askew. It goes in the wrong direction. Then we don't want to be violent. We don't want to be aggressive, so we put a lid on it. And the moment we squish our energy down, depression. That literally, depression, that's what it is. It's this terrible cycle that we go through, especially if you're trying to be a good, decent human being. It's a real occupational hazard in a way. And so we'll see why we had to look at hostility and aversion first, and patience, because that's directly how we're going to deal with the depression. So thank you so much, Oren. It's a curly one, but that's what I like. I like being thrown in the deep end. So today's topic's what we're going to have a look at. Is it sadness or depression, and what's the difference? What's the difference between the two? A deeper look at the causes of suffering and how we have misconceptions. We labor under the misconceptions of what causes our problems. So then, even though we put in so much effort, if we're putting effort into the wrong things, it's just a waste. So to head off some of those misconceptions and get them in the right direction, how to break the toxic depression cycle, and the Buddha's radical methods for depression, because this is something you don't get anywhere else. A really radical, quite shocking, and incredibly effective. So let's take a moment to set our motivation. So, you know, in particular at the moment, many of us might be newly aware of the difficulties around the world. What's happening, you know, in politics, what's happening with war, what's happening with natural disasters, and then what's happening with everyone in our immediate local environment who's getting really fractious, who's over COVID, even though COVID's not over. So all of these things normally just cause us distress and aversion, but they are a reminder to us that, you know, cyclic existence is problematic. And we can just take a moment to relax our mind and relax our heart, and let the enormity of the difficulties become apparent to us, and recognize that just like we suffer, so do others. And just like we don't want to suffer, Nobody wants to. And this actually brings us closer together. And until something affects us, we don't even notice the suffering of others. Until it's happening to the people around us or our country or our environment, we're oblivious to the problems of others. So there is an incredible benefit that we can gain from the disasters. So let's set our motivation that whatever happens to us, both the good and the unpleasant, that we can use it on our spiritual journey. And that it's so imperative that we do, because if we're going to suffer, at least we should make it worthwhile, make it fuel for the spiritual journey, and to really be able to help others who are just like us and don't want to suffer. And in this motivation, that's a fairly immediate motivation, then set your mind, have this in the context that it is possible, remembering that the nature of your mind is by nature clear, like the sky, by nature clear, even if we are alienated from that clarity at the moment. All of the experiences arise within our mind, within that infinite clarity of our mind. And if we're going to figure out exactly who we are and where we are a place in the universe, that infinite clarity of our mind is our nature, is who we are. No boundaries, no barriers, infinitely pure, infinite good-heartedness. So by recognizing that, and that all of the problems are a way to remind us about this, the big context, with this attitude of altruism, of big-heartedness and courage, based on this understanding of our ultimate nature being expansive and clear and pure, so it's possible to do something about the problems. So we can start our class. We can contribute to world harmony by starting right now with our own inner harmony. So, don't shoot the messenger. I think we started off with this way back in class 1. And so I wanted to quote a famous drunk. I can't say his accent, but he said it many times in the movies, you know, the problem is that the problem is not the problem. So the problem is that depression is not the problem. The problem is that stress is not the problem. Anxiety is not the problem. So we talked about this a little bit in the previous classes, you know, to beware of the tyranny of cognitive fusion. And cognitive fusion is where something feels bad, it feels like a disaster, it feels awful, and therefore we think it is bad. It's bad for us, and we don't want it, we don't like it, and we want to get rid of it. So this is with all things. With stress, we think stress is bad, so we don't want any stress. We shield ourselves from stress. And so we have no chance to develop resilience. We feel anxiety and worry feels bad, then we think it is bad. Whereas actually, that's our wisdom, just becoming aware that there are problems and we need to do something about them. And depression feels bad, it feels awful, but actually, is it bad? Or is it a message? Is it something that we need to listen to? So we instinctively judge the worth of an emotional sensation by whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. But actually, that's not where the worth of it is. We judge things by how they first feel or first appear to us. And that's the cognitive fusion, and it gets us into big trouble. So just like the aches and pains of the flu, you know, they are not the flu. They are evidence that our body and the immune system is kicking in. So when we have an ache and a pain and a fever, that's evidence that our immune system is working. But when we have a pain and a fever, that's not what we think of, is it? That's when we just go, I just want to get rid of it. I just want it to go. And we even think it's bad. Whereas actually it's evidence that things are working right. So Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, the fever of your depression can be your path to compassion. So just like the fever and staying in bed and resting and all of those things and sweating things out and everything is our way of healing our body, of getting better, the fever of our depression and our stress and anxiety can be the path to real, genuine compassion in our heart. So it's like if we don't understand unhappiness or suffering, if we can't see it or admit it in ourselves, how are we going to feel for others? How are we going to have any empathy for others? It would be as if we went to a doctor who'd never been sick. Would we trust a doctor that never had a headache or never had an ache or pain? I mean, you know, they might know stuff, but if they don't know what it's like to labor under illness or pain, are we going to trust what they say? It's just all theory. You know, they're just going to say, I'll get over it, which often happens, doesn't it? Until the doctor experiences pain or sickness themselves, and then everything changes. So there's an amazing book by Oliver Sacks called A Leg to Stand On, because he was, I mean, what an amazing guy. You know, he's one of my all-time heroes. And he was a doctor, and it wasn't until his I can't remember, 30s or 40s that he actually got sick. And what happened was he broke his leg, and he'd never broken a bone in his body before then. And it changed everything from being a doctor to being a patient. And it changed everything in his life, including how he was a doctor, and brought incredible sense of humility and a great insight into his patients, as well as being a horrific accident. So I highly recommend that book, A Leg to Stand On. So when we're dealing with depression and anxiety, often it is really overwhelming and we need emergency action. And often that emergency action is taking medication, having a holiday, having a rest, having a mental health day. All of those things, we absolutely need to do them. Why? Because they give us this window of opportunity. Because when we're really under the hammer like that, like Lama Yeshe says, you have to be strong to do the spiritual work. So you've got to give yourself some space. So a rest, a holiday, and medication are really helpful. Don't get rid of those. We've got to make it as easy for ourselves as possible. But often what happens is if one of those things takes the pressure off, then we think everything's fixed. And then we have the window of opportunity, but we don't do the inner work to look at the root causes. So we have a bit of respite. We think everything's fixed, but then it comes back again. And it will continue to keep coming back again until we look at the root causes. What is the disease here? What is it that keeps on making me get, you know, emotionally sick? Right. So careful to not shoot the messenger. Now, I wanted to read something here. So neurologically, when we look at neuroscience, what's happening in our brain with our synapses, there is no difference between sadness and depression. And this is quite a radical thing, isn't it? Because we've got two different words for it, and in our mind we have an idea that they're two completely different things: grief or sadness and depression. So just take a moment to kind of think, what What do you think the difference is between those things? So Kathleen McDonald in this book, How to Meditate, has a great chapter called Dealing with Negative Energy. And she goes through a whole lot of really effective things that we can do to deal with depression. But this is just kind of to set the scene. So depression, there are various forms of depression, some short-term, others occur due to problems such as loss, illness, or not getting something that we want. Others are long-term and might be caused by genetic or biological factors. And meditation can be helpful, at least for some cases of depression. However, those that are severe or long-term may require medical or therapeutic treatment. So medication and meditation. So what is depression? Depression is a dark, heavy, unhappy state of mind. Self-centered and lacking in positive energy. And it frequently involves self-hatred, self-criticism, and other negative thought patterns. It's unrealistic, exaggerating the negative side of things and ignoring the positive side, or being unable to see the positive side, seeing the glass as half empty rather than half full. And, you know, as we know, once we're in that mindset, it's almost impossible to see it as half full, isn't it? Depression usually focuses on my problem and blows it up out of proportion. Our thoughts spiral downward. We feel the situation's hopeless and with no possibility of improving. We feel sorry for ourselves, seeing our ego at the center of a sad story, and we have little or no energy to share with others. We find it difficult to take care of ourselves, and we may bring others down with us. So it's a really familiar story, isn't it? I think we've all kind of we've kind of been there. And so please, I'm not being judgmental about this at all. I'm you know, speaking as much from my own experiences from you know what Venerable says in the book. So when we're thinking about what depression feels like, I mean, in Australia, we have an institution, a group called the Black Dog Institute, and they've personified depression as like a black dog that follows us, that always shadows us, that's, you know, that's always there, kind of bringing us down. And many times Venerable Robina has said, you know, we go along like this, day after day after day, and our depression gets more and more and it brings us down. And it's like driving the car with the oil light on. You can only do it for so long, and then the whole thing blows up, and then it's really difficult to do something about it. So it's the same with our depression, because it's kind of all encompassing. We go along and we go along and we just bear it and we just put up with it until it breaks us, and then it's very, very difficult to pick up the pieces. So I think that there is a whole lot of insight in our depression, and you know, feeling out of control, feeling powerless, looking at all the terrible things that are going on in the world. There is definitely insight in there. Even the self-criticisms have some insight, but the conclusions that we draw are really distorted. The conclusions that we draw aren't drawn from wisdom. They're just drawn from this very tunnel vision experience of cognitive fusion. So even though we may have a real instinctual insight into the suffering nature of existence, the conclusion that we draw is very dark, it's very cynical, and it's ignorant of our potential. So that's why, like, when people say they're there, it's not all that bad, that won't cut it. That's too pat. It is that bad, but where's the wisdom in that? That's our task. So neurologically, no difference between grief and depression. Does anyone have any idea what the difference would be? Why do we even think of those things as two different things? Abelardo, yes.
Well, from my understanding, sadness and so on is a basic emotion. Depression is a very complex state. It has anger, it has anxiety, as well as being down.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else? Oren, did you have no? Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking, but I wasn't going to talk again. I don't want to take.
Oh, okay.
No, I'll just say, I tend to look at sadness as you're thinking about being sad about a particular situation. And yeah, I mean, and depression has more of a stigma to it. And it's something, that a whole general attitude that you have about everything.
Yeah.
Just,
yeah, it's much more amorphous and just spread out over everything. That's right.
Yeah.
Whereas with grief or sadness, we can identify a cause for it. And so then, of course, we don't have such a feeling of like loss of power or control or anything like that, because we can see, oh yeah, it's legit. There's a cause for it. Yeah.
Sadness is like a coat that you can take off, and depression is like you can't get it off. You can't get it off. It's glued to you.
Well, actually, and that's another point that you brought up, that sadness, even though it can be completely overwhelming, and grief, it can last for a very, very long time, we do know that it will come to an end. We do know that the intensity of it changes. And like I remember being so unhappy as a child, and my mother saying, it'll pass. It won't be this bad forever. And I just could not believe her, because the feeling was so strong. And when the feeling is so strong, it encompasses everything. So then you think it will be forever. But then, as they say, time heals all wounds. Over time, it does change. And you can't believe it, but it does. And at the time, you'd never believe it, but it does change. So there's something in there. So let's have a look at just some things. Now, the basic differences. When we're depressed, it is very self-focused. So we're 100% overwhelmed by our own inner experience. And we're often oblivious to the effect that we have on others. So because we are so overwhelmed ourselves. And so in that sense, it's a neurotic state. And if you've ever lived with anybody with depression, you'll know how incredibly draining it is, because they have no idea how huge an effect they have and bring everybody else down. And yet, when we ourselves are depressed, we are oblivious to that. Whereas, if we have grief, automatically we develop a sense of empathy or connection with others. So, for instance, when COVID first hit in the first months and things, was it grief or was it depression? This enormous thing happened to the world, so distressing. And it's, I felt like I was grieving for the world. My mind could not encompass what was happening. And why I've decided that was grief and not depression was that suddenly I felt connected to the world. I felt connected when I read stories about what was happening in New York. My heart broke. I think of New York and the emotional scar that your city has, and I suddenly, really started caring about human beings. It made me remember other human beings. It made me feel connected in this entire catastrophe. And that's really different from depression, that is so alienated and disconnected. So when a disaster like this happens, when grief arises, then we've actually got a choice. Where do we go with this? Do we go with it and have the courage to experience grief, because we have to be strong to experience that? Or do we go, this is unbearable, and shut it down, and it turns into depression? So how we can be big-hearted to experience it as grief is because it connects us to others, and now suddenly we care about others. They matter, and we feel they're just like me, even if I don't know them. So it really serves to develop our compassion. And anyone who's lost a pet, suddenly you understand when other people get so upset when their pets die, sometimes even more upset than when their family members die. You know, the humans getting over the death of a pet can be even more difficult than that. And if that's happened to you, when it happens to somebody else, you don't ridicule them for it. You don't think they're weird. You understand, and you can be there for them. And it's deep. It's not just on the level of intellect, oh, I've got to remember this or that. You just know what it's like. And isn't that one of the main things when we're feeling bad? We just want somebody else to know what it's like, to understand, just to be there with us. We know it can't be fixed, but just to have that company makes all the difference in the world. All right, what else? With depression, there's a whole total emotional stagnation. Everything comes to a standstill and we become stuck, don't we? And we lose all of our energy. We're in the quagmire. Whereas with grief or sadness, there is a momentum that is still there, and we do come out of it a better person, a kinder, naturally more patient human being. Because instead of saying to someone, oh, come on, get over it, it's not that bad, and getting impatient with them, getting impatient with their suffering, we understand, we're not terrified, we give them space and kindness. Depression, it alienates us from others. You know, let's face it, when we're depressed, we don't feel connected with people. We feel alone, and yet we're not. Whereas with grief or sadness, it unites a community. Depression distresses everyone around us, and often we don't even notice. Whereas with grief or sadness, we are ready to help others years after whatever it is that we've gone through our grief. We're still ready to help others because we know what it's like. And perhaps the most important thing is that with depression, why it is so debilitating, and I think, Oren, you said this, you know, that there seems to be no apparent benefit. There's no use for it. It's just a blanket thing over everything, with no rhyme or reason, no purpose. Whereas grief can be useful. So many of the very best inventions and community groups and everything came out of disaster, didn't they? Because people said, I can't bear anybody else to go through what I went through. I must do something about it. So medical instruments are invented. You know, incredible community organizations are started. Wonderful programs to help the vulnerable are developed. They don't come out of everything being great. They come out of people going, this suffering, I cannot let anybody else go through it. So it connects us and it makes the world a better place. So the other thing I wanted to say about this, about grief and depression, it's a cultural thing too. So in the psychiatrist manual, the DMB or whatever it's called, I can't remember what it's called, you know, the definition of depression has changed over time. And even just culturally, you know, when someone died, you were able to say grieve for quite a long time. When I was growing up in Melbourne, there was a huge Greek and Italian community in the suburb where I lived. And so when someone's husband died, they then just wore black for the rest of their life. Even very young women wore black for the rest of their life. You had the space to grieve for a long time. Then the younger women, they just wore black for 1 year. So you got a year in which everybody was aware, you're sad, you're vulnerable, take care. And you allowed yourself to go through the process. You know, sometimes when people wear a black armband, maybe being in grieving for, you know, a few months, maybe. So it used to be that you could get, say, 3 months of grieving, someone's died, 3 months, it's legit that you're sad. Then after 3 months, it's like, come on, get over it. Then the definition in that psychiatry manual changed from 3 months to 8 weeks. This is maybe 10 years ago or something. 8 weeks of grieving makes sense. 9 weeks, it becomes medicalized. There's something wrong with you. Then it changed back to 4 weeks. And now I think it might even be at 2 weeks. You get 2 weeks to grieve. And after that, it's medicalized. There's something wrong with you. You must get back to work and take some drugs. So this is a cultural idea that has shifted, in my opinion, not through caring for others and being a way of treating, but because of all sorts of other corrupting issues. So right there, our cultural idea of what is acceptable for being sad. You know, what's acceptable being sad for the world, being distressed for the world, it's legitimate. But after a certain amount of time, we medicalize it and say it's a problem, to the extent that now in Australia, you know, there's a whole lot of anxiety and depression about climate change and what's happening with the elements, with the floods and the fires, and then all the animals that die and everything. So what's the answer? What's the government doing? They're setting up self-help groups to stop your stress. Not to save the environment, to stop your stress, to self-care, to, you know, learn how to do mindfulness and whatever, as if that's even going to work. It just blows my mind, you know. So of course we need to be able to de-stress and everything, but that's not the main point. The main point is we have to start doing something about the climate. And if we don't, all of that stress and worry is actually legitimate. So again, as a culture, we've got ourselves in such a tangle of how we deal with this, and why we get in a tangle is because the depression, the sadness, it feels bad, so we just want to get rid of it. It's so short-sighted, whereas maybe that sadness is legitimate, and maybe we have to do something about what's causing it, like our grief for the world, our concern for the world, rather than just try and just feel better and blank it out. You know, which I did for many, many, many years. I can't tell you the amount of vodka I've drunk over the years as a way of just trying to feel better, but it didn't actually fix the problem. So let's have a look at, the toxic depression cycle, which is very similar to the anger cycle. You'll recognize it. So first, we have grasping at true existence. How does depression come about? Our modus operandi, without us even knowing, is grasping at true existence. So I've put a picture of colored glasses here because we don't know that's what we're doing. What we do is how things first seem to us, we think that's how they are, and then we hold tightly to it. So if we have a bad feeling arising, we think it's bad from its own side, and then we cannot be shaken from that. The thought, perhaps this is a bad, horrible feeling and it's going to have some incredible usefulness, has no room to move in there. So it's this grasping, and Venerable Robina puts it really well. She says we panic. And that's what the grasping does. Something, you know, arises that's unpleasant in our heart, and we panic and we want to shut it down. So that panic and wanting to shut it down, that is the grasping. And that's what causes all the problems. And it's very subtle to catch it at the time. So what happens instead is we have attachment needing things to be in a certain way. We're going along, everything's fine, everything's fine. Then suddenly things are not fine. Our desires are thwarted. We have to stay home in lockdown, or we get sick and we lose our physical energy, or we get the sack, or something that we don't like arises. And when that happens, we don't even know that comes from attachment. We just go, oh no, everything's gone wrong. But actually, things will always go wrong. That's actually the nature of things. Why we suffer is because our attachment to them going right, this thought, oh, they should work. Things should be good. People should always be good. We need things to be in a way, and I cannot bear it if they're not. So again, the attachment's very difficult to notice. We do not notice we have attachment until something is put in its way, until our desires are thwarted, and only then do we notice we have attachment. But we don't notice it as attachment. We just think, oh, there's something wrong over there. So of course, we think it's the thing over there. We think it's the computer malfunctioning that's making me stressed. We don't recognize it's our own stress that's just responding. It could have been anything, but it's our stressy response. So it becomes unbearable because we're focused outwards. And then we have this urge to blame. Now, when we have an urge to blame, because we're all focused outwards and we think it's your fault, or it's COVID's fault, or the government's fault, or my fault, because I should be able to cope with it, this urge to blame, it's always pointing at the wrong thing, oneself or others. It's not pointing at the root cause. And then again, as Venerable Robina so eloquently has put it again and again and again, we have two ways of responding. One is really volatile anger, and we express it and we throw that blame onto everybody else and we make them suffer. We think that by getting rid of it and expressing it, it's going to make it less. Actually, now both of us are angry. So then as good Buddhists, you know, or as people trying to be good, decent human beings, we go, oh no, I can't do that. I can't express it as volatile anger. So we swallow it down and it implodes within us. Anger directed inwards, hate, blame, aversion directed inwards, squashed down, turns into depression. Because all of that energy, that explosive energy, is blanketed down, literally. And so then it compounds our view of the world as being the glass half empty. So it's a really vicious cycle, isn't it? We can see how it happens, and right, instead of it going off into volatile anger, it goes into depression. And that's why depression's so closely linked with anger. So I'll tell you a story that illustrates this. One of our major benefactors of Langri Tangpa Center, you know, without whom we wouldn't be here, this really lovely lady, Cheryl, and she actually came to Langri Tangpa Center because she had such debilitating depression that she would put herself into electric shock therapy. She was at her wit's end with depression. Anyway, she found the Dharma. She found a Dharma center, and she found that especially the teachings on compassion and the four immeasurables and Buddhist psychology, very, very helpful. But I started noticing this cycle with her because she cared so much for animals. Her main thing was like animal welfare, saving animals, saving the orangutans, saving the animals from the floods. And what would happen was she cared so much about their suffering, but then she'd see the perpetrators of the suffering and she would hate the perpetrators. So the blame went to the person, the perpetrators, not to their disturbing emotions, not to their, their terrible upbringing or background, not to their erroneous political views or whatever, the person, those people. And she hated them because she was so concerned for the innocent animals. So this is what happens when our compassion is not informed by wisdom. Compassion turns to hate. And this is a terrible thing when you notice it in your heart. You care so deeply about the vulnerable, and somehow it turns to hatred. And why does it turn to hatred? Because this urge to blame, and we blame the person instead of their negativities. We blame the person instead of their confusion. We blame the person instead of their corruption. And then we now suddenly have hatred in our heart. It's terrible, isn't it? Once, we're the most kind, caring person, our heart breaks for others. And now suddenly it's overwhelmed with hatred. So what happened with poor darling Cheryl? She'd be so shocked at the amount of hatred in her heart, and she could not bear it, that she just shut it down. And she would go into huge depression for months and years. Because of the strength of her compassion, she'd shut it, it'd turn to hate, and she'd shut it down. And so this cycle would slowly go around, and the distress from the compassion would be a little bit less, and the hatred would be a little bit less. And so therefore the depression wouldn't last quite as long. And the cycles started getting less intense. But I just noticed it, and like powerless to do anything about it. Because if you can't actually pinpoint where the problem is, that cycle will continue. And then really good people who really care end up squishing all their energy down and has nowhere to go. So when we have empathy and care and compassion, that's not enough. That empathy for others, seeing the suffering of others and being unable to bear it, that is not enough. And actually that's not compassion. So compassion is where you go, I see the suffering of others, and instead of going, and I hate the perpetrator, and it turning to hate, you go, I see the suffering of others and I have to do something about it. And then we take responsibility. So compassion is an action. It's not a feeling. It comes from empathy, but it also comes from wisdom of understanding the situation so we can do something about it. So this is why the 4 immeasurables are so important, because compassion isn't just meditating on the sufferings of others and feeling empathy. It's inherent in it is this sense of responsibility. I've got to do something. And as we know, the moment we can do something, we feel in control again. So our whole mood, everything lifts. The moment we can do one thing, we feel better. Okay. So that's the toxic depression cycle. Now let's see what's driving it. Misconceptions about the cause of our suffering. So this urge to blame, okay, this is all the ways that we get it wrong. Not on purpose, but this is what happens. So one is when we feel bad, when we feel depressed and we can't identify why, like it's not really obvious, like my beautiful cat has just died, that's why I'm sad. Because we cannot identify a cause, we think there is no cause. We can't find the cause, therefore we think it's causeless. We assume we cannot, because we cannot identify a reason, that there is no reason, there is no cause for our suffering. It's just arbitrary, it's just random. This is debilitating, isn't it? No cause, random, nothing we can do. We're completely powerless. So the thing to remember here is that just because we cannot find a reason for being depressed doesn't mean there's no reason, because everything that we experience necessarily has a cause. It doesn't come from nothing. So we can like reverse engineer it and go, okay, I'm experiencing depression. I have no idea why. It's just washed over me like this black cloud. I have no idea why, but there is a cause somewhere and I will find it. So it's okay. So that way it doesn't get away with us. It won't lead to hopelessness, to anger, to guilt, all of those things where we can't identify the cause. We won't feel guilty because it's not legitimate. Well, no, of course, if I'm experiencing it, necessarily there's a cause. So we won't feel stupid or, you know, gaslight ourselves about it. So in terms of this one of causeless, are there any questions directly about that one? Does it make sense? Okay.
Actually, I'm just curious. I don't know too much about what gaslighting means. What would
Oh,
it mean?
yeah.
Like, what's an example of like us gaslighting ourselves?
I didn't know what gaslighting was either, but I keep on seeing it in social media. So I found out, and it comes from an old movie with Betty Davis in it, called Gaslight. And it's where she thought she was going crazy because she'd hear all these noises and the lights started going off and down or whatever. And her husband said, no, there's nothing wrong here. It must be all in your mind. So she started doubting herself. But actually, he had nefarious intentions and he was fiddling with the gaslight. So it's become this thing where we delegitimize ourselves. We feel guilty about our own experience. We blame ourselves, or we minimize the pain that we're going through, or we minimize the pain that others are going through. We go, oh, well, you know, that's just what happens, or get over it, blah, blah, blah. It's gaslighting. So it's making you really doubt your own authentic experience.
Thank you.
Lauren? Is that Lauren or?
Yes, I had a question, and I hope you're going to get to this, but I know it's not necessarily an easy thing. But if one is struggling with depression and one is not seeing a cause, I understand that there's a cause, but if one doesn't see it, how do we get to that cause?
Yeah.
And even stuff like
Yeah, so that's
or
where
other things. Yeah.
That's where you go through the 4-point checklist. You first check the physiological causes. Remember, and then you check, did something happen that I've just assumed I was fine about, but I'm actually not. Then you check what's going on with my afflictive emotions. You know, is my attachment out of control? Is my aversion and short-temperedness out of control? Are my default go-to habit patterns really negative? So you go progressively from the most obvious and easiest to deal with, and then keep on working deeper and deeper and deeper. And actually, even from a Buddhist point of view, it may not be any of these. It may be a karmic echo from the past that you just have to live through, and then it will be over. Then one day it will lift. So that's kind of why I had that checklist about the causes of depression and anxiety, because yeah, what do we do if we can't identify a cause? Number one, we can relax because there is a cause, even if we can't find it this second. And then slowly go through in a nice organized fashion, checking. And, you know, even if bad diet may not be the root cause, it may be compounding the matter. So start with the easy things. Then we have the strength to start looking deeper. So maybe that's the one that needs to be in our wallet, folks, the checklist. There's another fantastic book that I read called The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. And he's another amazing writer, a lot like Oliver Sacks, actually. That's a whole nother discussion, the Checklist Manifesto. And also something or other about, you know, why things go wrong and how to deal with them. Really fantastic, very inspiring writer. Okay, so misconceptions of the causes of suffering. So when we cannot find a cause, often what we do is then we blame ourselves. So that's the wrong cause. So we think it's my fault. We blame ourselves and we put harsh criticism onto ourselves. We judge ourselves as worthless, as not being any good, as not being able to deal with anything. Or we blame others. We blame another person, often our parents, for the way they brought us up, or we blame society, we blame our circumstances, we blame our poverty, we blame being brought up a rich kid, we blame that we're, you know, fat and old, or we blame that we're young and beautiful and no one pays any, you know, takes us seriously. We blame God, we blame ourselves. Maybe God doesn't love me because I'm a monster. All of these things, it's the wrong cause. But how many of those do we do? So wrong cause, there's a nuance here. So all of those things, again, I'm not gaslighting, right? So all of those things may have an effect on us, but they're not the cause. They are a trigger. They're a catalyst. And this is the nuance. That often what triggers us, and this is what's so great about the word trigger, is that built into that term is the idea that something outside triggers something inside. Whereas when we blame the wrong cause, we're just looking at the something else. The something out there is the cause. And we forget our part in it, which is our readiness to be triggered, our weakness, why it's a trigger. And there's something very kind of logical about this, that if it was that thing out there, if it was those parents or society or whatever, then everybody would have reacted in the same way as me. But people react in all different ways, don't they? So that points to our side of the story. So blaming the wrong cause, it's better to think of it as those things are triggers or conditions, circumstances, but they're not the root cause. Also remember, there is a terrible payoff that happens here, that if we blame someone or something else, or blame the wrong cause, the moment we blame, we lose our power. Because if I go, it's society's fault, for instance, or politics' fault, and I have no control over politics, there's nothing I can do. So we've just dug ourselves a terrible hole there. We give away our power. So, of course, politics can be really destructive. Other people can be really destructive. Situations can be terrible. Absolutely, that's true. But how we respond, that's our part of the story. What is triggered in us? Blame or compassion? Are we galvanized into action, or are we just smacked down with depression? That's our story, and that's something we can do something about. Okay, so there's a question here from Oren. Grieving the loss of a loved one, or many people say it's time to get over it. And that can be very destructive to a grieving person. That's true. That's right. And often when people say it's time to get over it, it's because they themselves cannot bear the face of your suffering. They don't have the patience for it. It brings up all their own unresolved issues. They don't have that strength. So yeah, that's very true. So what happens though, often with grief, is if we don't have a chance to process it, grief too can turn to depression. It becomes like a habit that just goes around and around and around. And it doesn't actually lead anywhere. So grief is a process, and sometimes we can get really stuck in it. And what happens is we re-trigger ourselves again and again and again, and we don't have a chance to grow and come through it. Okay, so, oh my gosh, here we go. So then the next one, then we go, oh, one cause. It's got to be one thing, and we settle on one thing. This is why I'm unhappy. So there are many factors, because most of those things are these triggers, these circumstances. But one of the main things where we go, it's one cause, what we do in our Western society is we go, well, it's because neurologically I'm hardwired that way. So we think it's neurological or genetic, biological, brain chemistry. And then we think it's that, therefore there's nothing I can do about it. So this dovetailing into the one cause, it's actually out of step with reality, because even if it is hardwired in our brain, even if it is you know, a generational thing, which depression and anxiety often can be, you know, like trauma is passed on from generation to generation, both emotionally, but also neurologically, you know, the way that your brain is wired is different. But even then, it doesn't mean that it has to come to its full expression. Even then, just like if you have whatever genetic makeup you have, if you have genes for various different diseases and things, that's not fatalistic, because whether that disease eventuates till its fullest or just in a mild form depends on a whole lot of other things. It depends on the circumstances, on how much support we have. So even if our brain is wired for trauma or depression, it doesn't mean that that's what's going to have to happen, because we can ameliorate that by retraining our mind, by being with people that really support us in this inner journey, by taking medication that gives us this window of opportunity. It's like, you know, reboots us so that we can start the work. It's always possible to do something. So if you feel that fatalistic thought, there's nothing I can do because of this one thing, one cause, it's a misconception. There's always something we can do. The last one. So these four actually come from the Buddha's teachings on the second noble truth, the truth of origin, or the cause of suffering. So the last one of these four main misconceptions is permanency. We think our problems and suffering are permanent, that they'll last forever, that there's nothing that we can do. And why do we think that? Not because it's logical, but because that's how we feel. You know, when we feel bad and it is all encompassing, then we think it will last forever. But this is the wonderful thing about impermanence, that even depression cannot last. And this is like the number one thing that most depression self-help groups say, this too shall pass. We know that. And when it comes from someone who suffers depression, to share that with somebody else, to say, I know you feel like it's going to be like this forever, but it will pass. It means so much. So let's see how we can heal the toxic depression cycle. We've given this background of the misconceptions. So instead of this number one, grasping at true existence, oh, there we go. No mud, no lotus, as one of our directors used to say. No mud, no lotus. So without problems, we cannot grow. Whilst we just focus on the mud, we're going to miss out on the lotus. So we be aware that with that mud, the lotus comes out of that, our beautiful, wonderful, unstained, unsullied, perfect, pure heartedness, clear mind. But, you know, when we're overwhelmed by the mud, we can't even conceive of that, can we? So what do? Instead of grasping at true existence, meditate on this nature of the clarity of your mind. Become aware of your true nature. So take a step back, become a watcher in your mind, listen to what your thoughts and emotions are saying without believing them. Be mindful without getting involved. Investigate what is this sense of self that experiences all these feelings. Who is this self anyway? Is it solid and permanent? Does it last forever? Is it changing? So just to meditate on the sky rather than the clouds within it. To meditate on the clarity of the water rather than the mud within it. Number one, if we have a practice like this, it will affect everything else in a positive way. Okay, but that takes time, doesn't it? That's changing our whole mindset. So with this one, attachment needs things to be in a certain way. Instead, acknowledge those feelings of aversion, of panicking, of wanting things to be different than what they are, but acknowledge them as emotional sensations, not as truth. So just like when we have a physical sensation and we go, oh yeah, that it's a physical sensation. So when an emotion arises, don't put huge meaning into it. Don't catastrophize. Number one, recognize, here comes an emotional sensation, not a physical feeling, an emotional feeling. No, where do I feel it? What's its tone? What's its texture? If you're really good at it, think, well, what is it telling me? What's the story, as Venerable Rabina says? So rather than becoming completely absorbed into it, start acknowledging it and describing it. Then, when our desires are thwarted and aversion starts arising, remember impermanence. So even aversion will pass. Even this difficult experience will pass. Even depression will pass. Impermanence is our friend in this case. And that lets us relax, because generally when aversion arises, we're going, no, I don't want it. I don't want it. I can't bear it. I don't want it. So if we just go, yeah, it is actually going to pass, we can relax a little bit. And then instead of it being unbearable, now when things are unbearable, it's because we're focusing on everything we don't like. So we change our focus to actually appreciate, well, what are the things that are going well? Appreciate our fortunate human situation, our luck. So for instance, if you're in an accident in a affluent Western country, likely or not, there's an ambulance, there's a hospital, there's people to take care of you. If you're in an accident in a really poverty-stricken country, say you're in Bangladesh and you have an accident, it's going to be a lot more difficult, isn't it? So at least when things go wrong, we can appreciate we do have support around us. We are in a relatively peaceful situation. We do have our human life and our good-heartedness and our innate human intelligence, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says. We have incredible fortune and incredible support there. We just have to recognize it and really appreciate it. Wow, in amongst the disaster, I'm so lucky. And then instead of blaming others for making us unhappy, meditating on love. How actually I wish, just like I want to be happy, I wish they were happy. If they were happy, they wouldn't be acting so destructively. it's better here to meditate on loving kindness, wishing all the very best for everybody, feeling really warmly towards everybody. Careful here about meditating on compassion, because if we're not skilled at it, it will just make us more depressed. Because remember, we mix up compassion and empathy. So often when we meditate on compassion, we start thinking about all the terrible ways everyone's suffering rather than all the ways I'm going to help them. It's very easy to fall into that. So much better and much more helpful for lifting our mind is to meditate on love and kindness and joyousness. And that will help lift our mood. It doubles our happiness, you know. And then instead of the anger directed outwards at others or directed inwards, it turns to depression, transform your experience. So this is using meditation, visualization, and various activities. And so that means more than just reading about stuff. We actually have to do something and change our experience. Because often when we just read about stuff, or, you know, we're listening, we go, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. But if we don't do the homework, or if we don't do the visualization where we start feeling different and we start identifying differently, how we feel is not going to change. So we have to bring it into our experience. Questions or comments before we quickly touch on Rinpoche's radical cures for depression? Does the healing depression cycle make sense? How you can take something from each step along the way? I mean, you don't have to do it in order, but you can. There is something, one of those things is going to look easier than the others, so that's where you start.
Can you repeat the last one of transform your experience?
Yeah, with visualization and activity. So with visualization, doing those beautiful meditations, say Shakyamuni Buddha, with the light coming and streaming through you and washing through you like a Niagara Falls of blissful light. So that what you imagine actually physiologically changes your body. Just like when we go to the movies and we get a fright in the movies and adrenaline happens, even though the thing didn't happen. So exactly the same way, when we do a visualization of light pouring through us, that has an effect on us. And this is what we want, the effect. We don't just want understanding, we want the effect. So if you're not comfortable even with the meditation, say of Shakyamuni Buddha, just the very general body of light meditations, which I think I put in one of those, they transform our experience, and then we're in a better place to start dealing with things. So that's one thing. The other is the actual activities, the thought transformation that we do, and your worksheets. So actually starting the work, the activities. Sarah, yes.
Hey, Miffi. I have a little cold, sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
So I suppose my question is, how do we practice this if we're in a type of situation that's very demanding? You know, I have a 6-year-old, he's got special needs. There's very, very little time to think, let alone practice these things. And it's often a very kind of distressing situation at home. You know, there's lots of meltdowns. And I can think of the same type of situation for people who are in abusive households, or any situation where, you know, the tension is, let's say, very high in your daily life, and you go home for that solace and you can't find it there. Do you have suggestions for how to sort of help with that?
So undoubtedly some of us have much harder lives than others. And so number one is to actually recognize objectively, your situation is really demanding. And so when you recognize that, then you can be kinder to yourself about it. So don't underestimate what you're doing. And even then, so like when we have compassion for others or great compassion, it also includes compassion for oneself or kindness to oneself. So to have that kindly attitude to yourself as you're in this incredibly demanding, challenging situation. Number one, to be kind. And then somewhere you've got to create a little bit of space so you can get your head around it and be proactive. Because if you create a little bit of space, so if sometimes you can have a carer come in just for a respite for an hour or half an hour or something, and you grab that space and you really set the big picture. What am I here for? That's right. I love this person who I have to look after. I really care about them. I wish them to be happy. And then you reconnect with the heart of the matter. And then that will mean that everything else that you do throughout the day will go in that direction. But often what happens, we get so stressed, we miss the heart of the matter and we just become reactive. And that's when we burn out, where we brings out our worst characteristics instead of our best.
Right,
So
yeah.
somewhere you've got to create some of that space to put in the big picture and the joy and what really, really matters.
Yeah. Be nice to be able to bring him along with me.
Yeah, well, that's right. So here you are karmically bound to someone very tightly, and you actually have the chance to do something about this. Then you can also pray to Tara. So praying to Tara doesn't mean praying to some goddess, but it means connecting with that enlightened energy, that Tara energy of quick enlightened help in emergencies. So reconnecting with that type of energy, wisdom and help together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So Buddha's radical cures. So Western psychology, it gives us a bit of a window of opportunity, gives us a bit of respite, but it doesn't go far enough. Buddhism adds in, we can do this for others. We can benefit from this experience. It takes it further, and it is radical. So number one, what Rinpoche says, and this comes from the book Ultimate Healing. Remember death and impermanence. So remember that even though something feels all-encompassing, it cannot last forever. Just remember that, and it will help. The other thing to remember is that our death will come. That's certain. And we don't even know when. It could be today. So do we want to die like this in a funk? Or do we want to have a good death? So in a way, what's so radical about this, Rinpoche says, to replace the thought, I'm not going to die, with the thought, hey, maybe I am going to die. And that changes our perspective. And, not to sound glib, but many times, even when we've got suicidal thoughts, underpinning that suicidal thought is the assumption that I am not going to die today. And so we want to hasten our death, and we want to put an end to our suffering. And we've just settled on a very extreme way to put an end to our suffering because we can't see any other way. But actually, what if we replace the thought, maybe I am going to die today? Am I ready? Do I want to die like this? It helps us really galvanize what matters to us, who matters to us. So it's quite a profound, different way. It's a whole like a U-turn in our own mind to remember impermanence and death. So the answer is not to say, oh, you're not going to die. The answer is go, yeah, it's definite. All of us Our life will come to an end. And in the time we have left, how do we want to live it? So this I found so helpful for me because, you know, I blame others and I, you know, I don't like injustice and I get really upset about things. But then I think, do I want this disturbance in our mind? If this was going to be my last day, do I want to spend it blaming somebody else? Or am I going to put that aside and take what's good? So how we do that is by remembering the likelihood of our death. And as we know, when you have a near-death experience, you can be going along all, you know, dark and la, 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 really ordinary and glum and whatever in your life. You have a near-death experience. Suddenly, you know, you have a car accident and you're alive and whew, that was lucky. And now suddenly you're so happy to be alive. You know, before it was just ordinary and da-da-da, but it's not until it's threatened that we go, oh my God, whew, that was close. You know, people get out of prison and they go, wow, the sky is blue. I'm outside, and they're happy. You know, but we're here, the sky is blue and I'm outside and I'm all in a funk. So the impermanence can be our friend. It can help us get a more realistic view of things just naturally. And this picture of the flowers, you know, so things come into existence and they go out of existence. Us, our friendships, society, the way the world is, it's constantly changing. And we grasp at the permanency. We don't want it to change. And the not wanting it to change is what causes us suffering. Whereas if we have this bunch of flowers, you know, someone gives us a beautiful bunch of flowers, as they start to wilt and look like this, we don't have a nervous breakdown about that. We don't go, oh no, why did they wilt? No. We know it's going to happen. And we don't grasp at the flowers wanting them to last forever and ever and ever, because we know it's in their nature to wilt and decay. And actually, that's why we give people flowers, because they're fragile and momentary and beautiful. And they bring out the exquisite preciousness of our life. That's why we give flowers, because they're impermanent. Nobody really shows up to a dinner party or a special occasion with a bunch of fake flowers, do they? You know, ones that'll last forever. We come with fresh ones because of their fragility. So there's a lot that we can learn from this. You know, every time you do flower offerings, we can remember this. The second one, experience it for others. So Rinpoche says to think, this is not my depression. I'm doing this for everybody. It's not just me. So instead of going, no, I don't want this, we go, okay, if I'm going to suffer, I'm going to make it worthwhile. I'm going to do it for everybody. And this is how a lot of people get through their grief. Instead of it going into depression, they're galvanized into, it's not just me. I'm going to do something. I'm going to go through this horrendous experience so nobody else has to. And just like, you know, with a doctor, if a doctor has never had a migraine and you go to them with a migraine, are you going to trust what they say? Are you going to feel cared for? Whereas if the doctor knows about migraines and they go, oh, I get it. You have a migraine, I understand. So now suddenly all the migraines that that doctor have, they're useful, not pleasant, but useful. So the same for us, all the grief and suffering that we go through, it's useful, because then we can really relate with others and they will trust us and we will naturally be kind and caring towards them. But if we're going, no, I can't bear it, and we shut down, we're also going to shut down on others, and we're going to be unintentionally mean and nasty and callous and not even notice that's what we're doing. So I had quite a rude awakening, you know, with COVID when it hit, because you remember how right in the beginning everyone kept on talking about it, these unprecedented times, this unprecedented you know, disease. Nothing like this has happened in the world again. But actually, historically, that's not accurate. It's very precedented, but because it happened to us, because it happened to me, now suddenly it matters. So actually, people and things and everything don't matter until it happens to us. So it took me a while, to my shame, to remember, hang on a second, it's not unprecedented. What about the AIDS HIV epidemic? That's within living memory. In fact, I was almost expelled from high school because I wrote an article about it in the 80s. This was very similar to COVID, but it had stigma. It had, you know, death threats. I mean, COVID does too, but, you know, not unprecedented. But if you weren't affected by that, and many people here at Lungary-Tumpa Centre, they weren't affected by the AIDS HIV epidemic when it first happened in the 80s, they don't even remember it. And so now COVID happens, now it's unprecedented. So it's only with our own suffering that we become aware of the problems of others. Until then, we are oblivious. So when we do have problems and suffering, we can think, wow, I can use this to be a better person, to connect with others, to actually be a force for good and care in the world. Because without it, we don't even notice. We don't even notice. And what about all the other diseases that have been around in the rest of the world that I haven't visited, you know, and I don't even know about? What about the diseases in Africa? Oh yeah, I heard of Ebola, but, you know, not sure. Not my people, doesn't matter. You know, so unintentionally callous. So experience it for others. Do it for others. It'll give us the big-heartedness and courage to use the experience. So in Buddhism, this is called Tonglen, taking the sufferings of others onto one's own self-cherishing. And this is the third method. So we experience it for others. It makes the world a better place. Then give it to your ego. So here's Gollum. Gollum is just the best example of ego self-cherishing. And if you've seen, you know, the Lord of the Rings movies, you know how he changes. You know, one is Smeagol, poor Smeagol, mistreated, downtrodden, hungry, craving, no friends. And then he switches to Gollum. And what's so nasty and evil about Gollum is this, it's all about me. This neurotic, self-centered, totally oblivious to others, full of rage and blame and hate and deviousness and all those terrible things. So that ego, that self-cherishing, that is not you. That's your affliction. It's not you. It's not the heart of the matter. That's your affliction. So if we're going to blame anyone or anything, that's who we blame, our inner Gollum, our self-cherishing that's caused all the problems. It's not us. So I really like this one because I do have the urge to blame. So if you've got that momentum, then you just got to direct it to the right bit. And the right bit is that self-cherishing Gollum that's ruined my life and everybody else's. It's that crust that encapsulates our heart, you know, like black coal. So you take all that depression and your suffering and you give it to the one that caused the problems. And in the meditation, you can imagine all of that as a crusty coal that is encompassing your heart, or as a crust of coal out there in front of you that blocks you from everybody else. And you take all of that suffering of everybody else and you just suck it up from the whole world and you put it onto that, onto the self-cherishing ego. And it just destroys it. It just explodes it. And what comes out from underneath? A supernova of love and light. It liberates all of your energy. So you're kind of going like, bring it on. Give it to me, come on. And you don't put it on me, little vulnerable, trying to be a good person, me. You put it on your ego. So this is the biggest mistake that we often make as Buddhists, that when we hear that take or blame into one, put it on oneself. It's not on, when we think of oneself, often when we blame ourselves, we're blaming everything good about ourselves, our nascent good qualities, our good intentions. We're like this poor little toddler, you know, that's trying to be a good person and is vulnerable and raw and shy and all of these things and forgets things. And then we blame that one. We blame the wrong one. So when you blame yourself, blame the right one, blame Gollum. So you take that momentum and you put it on that thing, and the one that's destroying our well-being, not the good self, not your Buddha nature. So, you know, when we think we're no good, it's not us that's no good. It's that self-cherishing Gollum that's no good. So that takes us to Miss Innate Human Intelligence, the winner. So our most wanted posters, remember all of the baddies? Well, now let's recognize our nascent good qualities that are inherent there at the core of our being, our innate human intelligence. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche and the entire Buddhist teaching say we have everything within us right now that we need to become free of suffering, to become free of problems. We have everything that we need. We don't need to go buy something else or change something else. It's within us. All of the resources are right there within us already. And what do? We have the protection, the mind protection of the Dharma. We cannot stop the rain of misfortune. We can protect our own mind. We cannot stop things going wrong. We can't stop diseases. We can't stop hostility, but we can protect our mind from contributing to it. And then we can begin to protect others. We can protect our mind in disastrous situations so we remain at ease and open-hearted. Oops. So, Buddha's wisdom is radical when we're dominated by attachment and then hostility. Depression will naturally arise. So don't try and just get rid of the problem, get rid of the causes of the problem. And Buddha's radical advice, enjoy your depression. Because the moment we can see a benefit in there, a purpose to it, we can enjoy it. Just like some people enjoy going to the gym or running marathons or cooking, you know, all of those things, because why? They see a benefit. Experience it on behalf of others. Use it to destroy the prison of your ego. Having depression shows us exactly where to start. Right there, how to heal ourselves. So the homework, there's self-reflection sheets and the 9-round breathing and the seed of light meditation, which really helps to lift your mind. TV homework, a couple of movies. Little Miss Sunshine is a fantastic one. And also a Japanese movie called Departures. In that quiet Japanese way, it's about a guy who accidentally becomes like a worker in a funeral home. And it's really, really sweet movie. I love it. Next steps, keep your notes, keep filling them in, and then keep them for next time when you do this course so you can compare them, because you get a real kick out of it, seeing how you have progressed. Right there in black and white to see. Continue with whatever other emotional balance series that you have, and support your Dharma center so that you can keep having courses like this and can keep doing this inner work and having an environment of, you know, like-minded people on the journey. So without our Dharma centers, we can't do this. So really, whatever you can do, doesn't matter small or large, to help donate your time or some money or some kind of support to help your Dharma center keep going. So we have gone over, but we started late, didn't we? So last questions before we finish. Is there anything outstanding, everybody? Anything at all? Anything about Buddha's radical cures? Oh, Abelardo, yeah.
Well, you brought out a huge topic today, which is facing death. Yeah, and recently I've been introduced to the practices of based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Great Liberation, Natural Liberation. I've been told is the correct translation. How one can during life, practice the 6 bardos, reflect on that, and is this something that you would advise?
Well, it's one of the main topics in the Lamrim, and it comes really early on because it's the context. It puts it in context that it's because we think this life will go on forever and our depression will go on forever that we even have suicidal thoughts. But the moment we realize, oh, my life won't go on forever, then suddenly the context changes and we start valuing our life. So it's really important, but it also comes right next door. This topic of death and impermanence comes right next door to appreciating our human life, really appreciating what we can do with it. So it's both the carrot and the stick, it's the fear, oh my gosh, it's going to come to an end, and also, wow, what I can do with it right now. They have to go together, otherwise we get stuck in panic. And then, of course, then the next thing is like refuge. What can I do? Which way do I go forward? So these teachings, they go in a really nice order like that. Often the trajectory of the Lamrim, it's up and down and up and down. So you get a bit of inspiration, then a bit of terror, then a bit more inspiration, then a bit of terror. And it's very finely calibrated to lead you through so that real emotional change happens rather than just trying to flatten it all out.
Well, thank you very much. And I say thank you now for this wonderful course, everything you've given of your own wisdom and heart. And I wanted to mention that your course is now for registration, your course on Tantra, on Shanti Deva.
Yep.
Yeah. So for anybody who's interested in continuing, it'll start in April. And when are you going to be putting up the materials?
I'm not sure. So you'll have to ask Shanti Deva about that, because I think I've sent the materials through already. So email Shanti Deva Center and we'll sort it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yes, so the introduction to Tantra class, on the surface it looks different, but it's still the same Dharma. We're still dealing with exactly the same things and the same kind of transformation and the same kind of how we get stuck and how we've got to release that ordinary view. So, but it's just coming from a more overtly Buddhist point of view. I think these two courses actually run very nicely together. So I really hope the course was beneficial for you, and I hope I wasn't too heavy and down, but it is a course about anxiety and depression, right? So it's likely to be about heavy and down, but I really, really hope that I've imparted something of some realistic hope, and to keep coming along to meditations and courses just as the exposure. That's like our life raft. As long as you show up, it doesn't matter if you're together or untogether. It doesn't matter if you're all over the show. our sense of perfectionism. Oh, I've got to be all, you know, centered to be able to come. Just show up. Just get yourself there, online or in person or to a meditation, so that regularly you have this support of a fellow community and some wisdom coming your way. That is the number one thing to do. Hell or high water. You know, it's not just fair weather Buddhists, but it's through thick and thin. So as long as you make it regularly that you show up, then everything else will be able to fall into place. And let's really dedicate that by having the courage to delve into these topics. You know, we have the courage because we have the potential to completely heal anxiety, depression, and all of our sufferings and all of the sufferings of the world if we dive deeply in enough. And we have the ability to be able to do it. And we have the ability to bring everybody else along with us. So let's have the big-hearted, courageous attitude to dedicate for that. Our own liberation from all problems and all of its causes. The new type of dedication, liberation from the causes of suffering. And then may we bring everyone along with us without leaving behind anybody, because that is our natural potential. So may we be the ones to bring this about. And then day to day, may we be a positive force in the world. May we create harmony and not hostility. May we use everything that comes our way to bring benefit to others, because there's no time to waste, right? So let's dedicate everything for the benefit of others.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Miffi.
Thank you. Really appreciate your time. You got me hooked on the festival show. I can really relate to that show because I've worked at a lot of different hotels over my life.
I find you astoundingly generous, and what you put into this course is amazing. You set a very good example for all of us. No,
thank
really.
you. I give it everything I've got. Honestly, I'll give you absolutely everything I possibly have, and I just hope it's enough. So, you know, and please, let's stay in touch. Hey.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. All the best.
Thank you so much, Miffi.
Thank you.
Best wishes.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
One, yes.
Good night.